The cellar door creaked open beneath my trembling hands, and the musty air that rushed up carried with it the scent of secrets that had been buried for 18 years. I stood there on the threshold of my grandfather's abandoned ranch, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness below, knowing that whatever waited in that cellar would change everything I thought I knew about my family, about myself, about why I had spent my entire life believing I was unwanted. 3 months earlier, I had been counting down the days until I aged out of Riverside Children's Home. At 18, the state would no longer be responsible for me, and I would join the ranks of foster kids who disappear into the world with nothing but a garbage bag of belongings and a heart full of questions about where they came from. I had spent my childhood moving between foster families, always the temporary addition, never the permanent fixture. Some families were kind, others were not, but none of them ever became home. That Tuesday morning in March, I was folding laundry in the industrial basement of Riverside when Carol Anderson, the home's director, found me. She held an envelope in her hands, the kind of thick, cream-colored paper that suggested importance, maybe even money. Carol's expression was unreadable as she approached, her sensible shoes clicking against the concrete floor. "Carol, I need to speak with you privately," she said, and something in her voice made my stomach clench. After 18 years in the system, you learn to read the subtle signs that your life is about to change again. We walked to her office in silence, past the common room where younger kids watch cartoons on the old television, past the kitchen where the smell of institutional food lingered in the air. Carol's office was small and cluttered, filled with case files and coffee-stained paperwork that represented dozens of kids like me, kids whose stories had been reduced to manila folders and bureaucratic language. She handed me the envelope, and I noticed my hands were shaking as I took it. The return address, Bushhamoun, read Mitchell and Associates, attorneys at law, from a town called Cedar Falls that I had never heard of. Inside was a letter that would unravel everything I thought I knew about my origins. The letter was from James Mitchell, an attorney representing the estate of someone named Alan Roberts. According to the carefully worded document, Alan Roberts had been my maternal grandfather, and he had died 3 months ago at the age of 74. He had left me his ranch, all 40 acres of it, along with the farmhouse, outbuildings, and everything contained within them. I read the letter 3 times before the words began to make sense. I had a grandfather, I had family. Somewhere in a place called Cedar Falls, there was land that belonged to me, a house that carried my blood, a legacy that had been waiting for me to claim it. Before we see how this ends, tell us where you're watching from and hype this video in the comments. Carol watched me process the information, her expression softening as she saw the tears I was trying to hold back. She had been at Riverside for 15 years, and she had seen kids receive news about family before. Sometimes it was good news, sometimes it was devastating, but it was always life-changing. "Why didn't he ever contact me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "If he knew about me, if he was my family, why did he let me grow up here?" Carol shook her head gently. "The letter doesn't say, honey. Sometimes adults make choices they think are right at the time, and sometimes those choices have consequences they never intended." The attorney wanted to meet with me to discuss the inheritance and handle the legal transfer of the property. According to the letter, I could take possession of the ranch as soon as the paperwork was completed. It seemed impossible, like something that happened to other people, people who had normal families and normal lives. That night, I lay in my narrow bed in the dormitory-style room I shared with 3 other girls, staring at the ceiling and trying to imagine what a grandfather looked like, what his voice sounded like. What kind of man leaves his granddaughter a ranch but never bothers to meet her? I had spent my childhood creating elaborate fantasies about my family, imagining parents who were searching for me, relatives who would one day show up to claim me, but I had never imagined a grandfather who knew about me but chose to stay away. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in the office of James Mitchell, the attorney who had sent the letter. His office was in a small building on the main street of Cedar Falls, a town that looked like something from a movie about rural America. The buildings were old but well-maintained, the sidewalks were clean, and everyone I passed on the street had nodded and smiled like they knew me. James Mitchell was a man in his 60s with kind eyes and calloused hands that suggested he had not always been a lawyer. He explained that my grandfather had owned a cattle ranch about 10 miles outside of town, that he had lived alone for the past 20 years, and that he had been very specific in his will about wanting the property to go to me. Your grandfather was a complicated man, James Mitchell told me, as he spread the legal documents across his desk. He made some choices early in life that he regretted, and I think leaving you this ranch was his way of trying to make amends. I signed papers I barely understood, my hand trembling as I wrote my name on documents that would make me a landowner, a person with roots, someone who belongs somewhere. James Mitchell gave me the keys to the ranch and directions to find it, along with his business card and instructions to call him if I needed anything. The drive to the ranch took me through rolling hills covered in tall grass that moved like water in the wind. I had never seen so much open space, so much sky. Growing up in the city, surrounded by concrete and buildings, I had never understood what people meant when they talked about the beauty of the countryside. But as I drove down the gravel road that led to my grandfather's property, I began to understand. The house appeared first, a two-story farmhouse with white siding and a wraparound porch that looked like it had been built to last forever. The paint was peeling in places, and some of the porch boards sagged, but the structure was solid, dignified in its age. Behind the house stood a large red barn, several smaller outbuildings, and fencing that stretched as far as I could see. I parked my beat-up Honda in front of the house and sat for a moment, trying to process the fact that this was mine, that I was home. The silence was overwhelming after a lifetime of institutional noise, the constant sound of other people living their lives in close proximity. Here, the only sounds were the wind through the ground and the distant lowing of cattle that belonged to neighboring ranches. The front door was locked, but the key James Mitchell had given me turned easily in the old mechanism. The door opened with a groan of hinges that had not been oiled in months, and I stepped into my grandfather's house, into the place where my mother had grown up, into the history I had never known existed. The house smelled like dust and loneliness, but underneath those scents was something warmer. Something that suggested this had been a home where people had lived and loved and made memories. The furniture was old but well made, the kind of pieces that were built to last generations. Family photographs lined the mantelpiece above the fireplace, and I approached them slowly, my heart pounding as I prepared to see my family for the first time. There she was, my mother, in a photograph that must have been taken when she was about my age. She had my eyes, my stubborn chin, my unruly dark hair. She was standing next to a man who had to be my grandfather, Alan Roberts, and they were both smiling at something outside the frame of the photograph. They looked happy, comfortable with each other, like a real family. I picked up the photograph with shaking hands, studying my mother's face, trying to find myself in her features. She was beautiful in the way that young people are beautiful, full of possibility and hope. I wondered what had happened to drive her away from this place. What had caused her to leave her father and end up pregnant and alone in the city where I was born? The house was full of questions I would never be able to ask. In the kitchen, I found a calendar that still showed the month my grandfather died, with appointments and reminders written in careful handwriting. In the living room, there were books about cattle ranching and agriculture, magazines about farming, evidence of a life dedicated to working the land. I climbed the stairs to the second floor, my footsteps echoing in the empty house. There were 3 bedrooms, including one that had obviously belonged to my mother. The walls were painted pale yellow, and there were still posters of long-forgotten musicians and actors. A shelf held trophies from high school rodeo competitions, and a desk was covered with the kind of teenage debris that gets left behind when someone leaves home suddenly. In the master bedroom, I found my grandfather's clothes still hanging in the closet, his reading glasses on the nightstand next to a book about the history of cattle ranching in the area. Everything suggested a man who had lived simply, who had found meaning in his work and his connection to the land. But it was not until I went to the basement that I found the real story, the explanation for why my grandfather had known about me but never contacted me, why my mother had left this place and never returned. The basement was accessed through a door in the kitchen, and as I descended the wooden steps with my flashlight, I could smell the mustiness of a space that had been closed up for too long. The basement was larger than I had expected, with stone walls and a concrete floor. Most of it was filled with the usual basement items, old furniture, boxes of Christmas decorations, tools and equipment that had seen better days. But in the far corner, behind a stack of boxes, I found something that made my breath catch in my throat. It was a smaller room, almost like a cellar within the cellar. And when I opened the door, my flashlight beam revealed something that explained everything. The room was filled with baby things, a crib, a changing table, boxes of tiny clothes, toys that had never been played with. Everything was covered in dust, but it was all there, waiting as if someone had prepared for a baby who never came home. On a small table in the corner of the room, I found a stack of letters tied with a faded ribbon. The envelopes were addressed to Alan Roberts, and the return address was the Riverside Children's Home. My hands shook as I untied the ribbon and opened the first letter. The letter was from Carol Anderson, written 18 years ago, shortly after I had been brought to Riverside as a newborn. She was writing to inform my grandfather that his daughter had died in childbirth and that I had been placed in state care. She explained that my mother had listed him as next of kin, but that attempts to contact him had been unsuccessful. The second letter was dated 6 months later, another attempt to reach my grandfather, this time with more details about my placement and an invitation for him to visit or make contact. The third letter was from a year later, and then there were no more letters from Carol Anderson. But there were other letters, dozens of them, all addressed to me at the Riverside Children's Home. They were letters my grandfather had written but never sent, letters that chronicled my childhood from his imagination, birthday wishes and Christmas greetings and stories about life on the ranch. He had written to me faithfully for 18 years, pouring his heart onto paper, but he had never found the courage to mail a single letter. I sat on the dusty floor of that cellar room and read letter after letter, crying as I discovered the grandfather who had loved me from a distance, who had prepared a nursery for me and then sealed it away when I never came home. He wrote about his regrets, about how he had failed my mother, about how he was too proud and too stubborn to admit he needed help raising a granddaughter. In one letter written on my 10th birthday, he explained how he had driven to Riverside Children's Home 3 times, sitting in the parking lot and watching children play, wondering if one of them was me. But he had never gotten out of the truck, never walked through those doors, because he was convinced that I was better off without him. He wrote about my mother, about how headstrong and independent she had been, about how they had fought when she wanted to leave the ranch and see the world. He had been too proud to apologize, too set in his ways to understand that a young woman might want something different than the life he had planned for her. When she left, he had been too stubborn to go after her, and when she died, he had been too ashamed to claim the granddaughter she had left behind. The last letter was dated just a month before he died. In it, he wrote about his failing health, about his regret that he had waited too long to reach out to me. He explained that he was leaving me the ranch because it was the only way he knew to say he was sorry, to give me the home and the family legacy that should have been mine from the beginning. I spent the night in that cellar room, reading and rereading those letters, trying to understand the complicated emotions of a man who had loved me enough to prepare a place for me, but had been too afraid to offer it. By morning, I had made a decision. I was going to stay. I was going to make this ranch my home, to honor the grandfather I had never met, to build the life my mother had never had the chance to live. The next few months were the hardest and most rewarding of my life. I threw myself into learning everything I could about ranching, about the land, about the community that had been my grandfather's world. James Mitchell introduced me to Jack Bennett, a neighboring rancher who had been my grandfather's closest friend. Jack was a man in his 70s with weathered hands and a kind smile, and he took it upon himself to teach me what I needed to know. Jack told me stories about my grandfather, about how respected he had been in the community, about how much he had regretted the estrangement from my mother. He explained that my grandfather had been a proud man, the kind who found it easier to work with his hands than to express his emotions with words. Your grandfather was a good man who made some bad choices, Jack told me one afternoon as we repaired fence posts on the eastern boundary of the property. He loved your mother more than life itself, and when she left, it broke something in him. But he never stopped hoping she would come home. Jack introduced me to other members of the community, people who remembered my mother as a spirited teenager who could ride better than most of the boys and who had dreams bigger than Cedar Falls could contain. They welcomed me with a warmth I had never experienced, treating me not as an outsider but as someone who belonged, someone who had finally come home. Michelle Lopez ran the feed store in town, and she became my unofficial mentor in the practical aspects of ranch life. She taught me about cattle nutrition, about seasonal care, about the business side of ranching that my grandfather's books and records only hinted at. Michelle was a woman who had inherited her own family business and understood the challenges of carrying on a legacy. The ranch had been leased to neighboring ranchers since my grandfather's death, so the immediate financial pressure was manageable. But I knew that if I wanted to make this my permanent home, I would need to learn to run the operation myself. I threw myself into the work with the desperation of someone who had finally found something worth fighting for. I spent my days learning to mend fences, to maintain equipment, to understand the rhythms of the land and the animals that depended on it. I spent my evenings reading my grandfather's journals and agricultural manuals, trying to absorb decades of knowledge in a matter of months. The work was physically demanding in a way that nothing in my previous life had prepared me for, but it was also deeply satisfying. For the first time in my life, I was building something that belonged to me, something that no social worker could take away, something that no foster family could decide they no longer wanted. The ranch was mine in a way that nothing had ever been mine before, and I was determined to prove myself worthy of the gift my grandfather had left me. The community gradually accepted me as one of their own. I started attending the monthly meetings of the local Cattlemen's Association, where I was the youngest member by decades but was treated with respect because I was Alan Roberts' granddaughter. I joined the volunteer fire department, partly because they needed members and partly because I wanted to contribute to the community that was embracing me. Ashley Howard worked at the bank in town, and she helped me understand the financial aspects of the ranch operation. She explained the loan payments my grandfather had been making, the insurance policies he had maintained, the careful budgeting that had kept the ranch profitable even in difficult years. Ashley was close to my age, and she became my first real friend in Cedar Falls, someone who understood what it meant to be young and trying to prove yourself in a community of established adults. As the months passed, I began to understand why my mother had felt the need to leave this place. Cedar Falls was beautiful and peaceful, but it was also small and traditional, a place where everyone knew everyone else's business, where change came slowly and new ideas were viewed with suspicion. For a young woman with dreams of seeing the world, it would have felt confining. But for me, someone who had never had roots, never had a community, never had a place to belong, Cedar Falls felt like a miracle. I loved the way people waved when they passed on the road, the way neighbors showed up to help when someone was in trouble, the way my grandfather's reputation opened doors and created opportunities for me. I started dating Jeffrey Hill, a veterinarian who serviced the ranches in the area. Jeffrey was kind and patient, willing to teach me about animal care and ranch management without making me feel ignorant or incompetent. He had known my mother when they were in high school together, and he shared memories of her that helped me understand the person she had been before tragedy cut her off life short. Jeffrey told me about my mother's dreams of becoming a teacher, about how she had planned to go to college and then return to Cedar Falls to work in the local school. She had wanted to see the world, but she had also wanted to come home, to raise her children in the community where she had been raised. Your mother never wanted to leave forever, Jeffrey explained as we sat on the porch of the farmhouse one evening, watching the sun set over the pastures. She just wanted to spread her wings, to prove to herself that she could make it on her own. Your grandfather never understood that. He thought if she left, she was rejecting everything he had given her. I began to understand the tragedy of my family's story. My mother and grandfather had both been stubborn, both had been proud, and neither had been willing to bend enough to bridge the gap between them. My mother had died believing her father had rejected her, and my grandfather had died believing his daughter had rejected him. The truth was that they had both been too afraid of being hurt to risk reaching out. As I settled into life on the ranch, I started making changes that honored both my grandfather's legacy and my own vision for the future. I converted one of the unused bedrooms into an office where I could manage the business side of the operation. I updated some of the equipment, invested in improvements that would make the ranch more efficient and profitable. But I also preserved the things that mattered most. I kept my grandfather's workshop exactly as he had left it, with his tools arranged on the pegboard and his reading glasses on the workbench. I maintained my mother's bedroom as a shrine to the young woman she had been, a reminder of the dreams that had been cut short. The cellar room where I had found the baby furniture became my private space for reflection and remembrance. I cleaned it thoroughly, arranged the furniture properly, and created a small memorial where I could go to feel connected to the family I had never known but was finally beginning to understand. Frances Powell was the librarian in Cedar Falls, and she helped me research my family's history in the area. The Roberts family had been ranching in the valley for 3 generations before my grandfather, and the land I had inherited carried the dreams and struggles of people whose names I was just beginning to learn. Frances showed me newspaper clippings about my great-grandfather's success with cattle breeding, about my grandfather's innovations in sustainable ranching practices, about my mother's achievements in high school rodeo. I was not just inheriting land, I was inheriting a legacy of hard work, determination, and connection to the community. One year after I had first arrived in Cedar Falls, I hosted my first community barbecue on the ranch. It was a tradition my grandfather had maintained for decades, an annual gathering where neighbors came together to celebrate the end of the summer and the beginning of the harvest season. I spent weeks preparing, cleaning the barn, setting up tables, coordinating with local musicians who would provide entertainment. I was nervous about hosting such an important community event, worried that I would somehow fail to live up to the standard my grandfather had set. But as the guests began arriving that Saturday afternoon, I realized that the community was not judging me against my grandfather's memory. They were celebrating me, welcoming me, acknowledging that I had become one of them. Children played in the pastures while their parents talked business and shared news. Elderly couples danced to music that had been popular when they were young. Everyone contributed something, whether it was food, music, or simply their presence. James Ruiz, a rancher from the next county over, approached me during the barbecue with a business proposition. He had heard about the improvements I had been making to my grandfather's operation, and he wanted to discuss a partnership that would benefit both our ranches. It was the first time someone had approached me as an equal, as a legitimate member of the ranching community, rather than as Alan Roberts' granddaughter who was trying to learn the business. As the evening wore on and the last guest departed, I stood on the porch of my farmhouse and looked out over the land that had become my home. The moon was full, casting silver light over the pastures where cattle grazed peacefully. The silence was no longer overwhelming. It was comforting, a reminder that I had found the peace and belonging that had eluded me for 18 years. I thought about my mother, about the young woman in the photographs who had left this place in search of something she thought she could only find elsewhere. I wondered if she had ever found what she was looking for, if she had been happy during the brief time she had lived after leaving Cedar Falls. I hoped that somehow, wherever she was, she knew that I had come home, that the family legacy was continuing, that her sacrifice had not been in vain. I thought about my grandfather, about the man who had loved me enough to leave me everything but had been too afraid to give me the one thing I had needed most, his presence in my life. I understood now that he had been doing the best he could with the emotional tools he had been given, that his generation had not been taught to express vulnerability or to ask for help when they needed it. The ranch had taught me about forgiveness, about the complexity of family relationships, about the difference between the family you are born into and the family you choose to create. The community of Cedar Falls had become my chosen family, people who cared about my success and who were invested in my future. 2 years after arriving at the ranch, I received a letter from Carol Anderson at Riverside Children's Home. She had heard through James Mitchell about my inheritance and wanted to know how I was adjusting to my new life. She also mentioned that she had several teenagers who were aging out of the system, young people who might benefit from learning about ranch work and rural life. The letter sparked an idea that would become my way of giving back to the community that had given me so much. I started a program that brought foster teenagers to the ranch during summer months, giving them the opportunity to learn about agriculture, to experience rural life, and to understand that there were alternatives to city living when they aged out of the system. The first summer, I hosted 3 teenagers, young people who had never seen cattle up close, who had never experienced the satisfaction of physical work that produced tangible results. I taught them the same lessons Jack Bennett and Michelle Lopez and Jeffrey Hill had taught me, passing on the knowledge that had been freely shared with me. One of those teenagers was a 17-year-old girl named Sarah who reminded me of myself at that age, angry and defensive and convinced that the world had nothing good to offer her. By the end of the summer, Sarah was talking about applying to agricultural college, about maybe starting her own ranch someday. She had discovered, as I had, that there was healing in working with the land, in caring for animals, in being part of a community that valued hard work and mutual support. The program grew each year, and eventually I was able to offer year-round positions to young people who wanted to learn the ranching business. Some of them moved on to other opportunities, but others stayed in the area, becoming part of the community that had welcomed me. I married Jeffrey Hill in a ceremony held in the barn where my grandfather had once stored hay and equipment. The entire community attended, and James Mitchell walked me down the aisle since I had no father to perform that traditional role. It was a simple ceremony, but it was filled with the love and support of people who had become my family. Jeffrey and I built a life together on the ranch, expanding the operation, modernizing the facilities, but always maintaining the connection to the land and the community that made the place special. We had children who grew up knowing their family history, who understood the sacrifices and dreams that had created the life they inherited. Sometimes when I am working in the garden behind the farmhouse or sitting on the porch in the evening, I think about the 18-year-old girl who had stood in that cellar room reading letters from a grandfather she had never met. That girl had been so angry, so hurt by the years of abandonment and rejection. She had been convinced that she was unlovable, that she would never find a place where she belonged. I wish I could go back and tell her that she was wrong, that the best part of her life was waiting for her in a place she had never imagined, among people she had never dreamed existed. I would tell her that family is not just about blood relationships, that home is not just about the place where you were born, that belonging is something you can create for yourself if you are brave enough to accept it when it is offered. The ranch taught me that legacy is not just about what you inherit, it is about what you do with what you have been given. My grandfather left me land and buildings and equipment, but more importantly, he left me the opportunity to become part of something larger than myself, to contribute to a community, to build a life that mattered. I learned that forgiveness is not about forgetting the past or pretending that hurt did not happen. Forgiveness is about understanding that people do the best they can with the tools they have been given, and that sometimes love expresses itself in ways that are difficult to recognize. My grandfather's love was imperfect, but it was real, and it was strong enough to reach across the years of separation to give me the home I had always needed. The cellar room where I found those letters has become a place of remembrance and gratitude. I go there sometimes when I need to remember how far I have come, when I need to connect with the family members I never met but who shaped my life in profound ways. The baby furniture is still there, but it is no longer a symbol of abandonment and loss. It has become a symbol of hope, of preparation, of love that transcends time and circumstances. I have added my own letters to the collection, letters to my mother and grandfather, letters to the children I hope to have someday, letters to the young people who come to the ranch looking for the same sense of belonging that I found here. Writing has become my way of processing the complex emotions that come with building a life on the foundation of other people's dreams and regrets. The ranch continues to thrive, not just as a business, but as a place where people can find healing and purpose. The foster program has become a model that other communities have adopted, and I am proud to know that young people across the region are discovering that there are alternatives to aging out of the system with nothing but uncertainty ahead of them. I often think about the moment when I first opened that cellar door, when I was 18 and alone, and convinced that I would never find a place where I belonged. I could never have imagined that the musty basement of an abandoned farmhouse would contain the key to understanding my family's story, to finding my own place in the world. The letters my grandfather wrote but never sent taught me about the complexity of human relationships, about how fear and pride can prevent us from reaching out to the people we love most. But they also taught me about the power of hope, about how love can persist even when it is not expressed, about how it is never too late to make amends or to change the trajectory of a family's story. Now, when young people come to the ranch carrying their own stories of abandonment and rejection, I share my grandfather's letters with them. I want them to understand that sometimes the people who seem to have rejected us are actually struggling with their own fears and limitations. I want them to know that family can be found in unexpected places, that belonging is not something you are born with, but something you can create. The ranch has taught me that home is not a place you find, it is a place you build. It is built from the relationships you nurture, the community you serve, the legacy you choose to continue or transform. It is built from forgiveness and understanding, from hard work and shared dreams, from the decision to plant roots and tend them carefully. Every morning when I walk out onto the porch and look over the land that my grandfather left me, I'm reminded of the journey that brought me here. I think about my mother who left this place in search of something she thought she could only find elsewhere. I think about my grandfather who prepared a place for me but was too afraid to offer it directly. And I think about the 18-year-old girl who found a cellar full of secrets and chose to build a life on the foundation of other people's love and regret. The ranch has become more than just my home. It has become a symbol of the possibility of redemption, of second chances, of the way that love can transcend time and circumstance to create something beautiful. When I host the annual community barbecue, when I welcome new foster teenagers to the ranch, when I sit in the cellar room reading my grandfather's letters, I am participating in a story that is larger than my individual life. I have learned that family is not defined by perfection or by the absence of conflict. Family is defined by persistence, by the decision to keep loving even when love is difficult, by the willingness to forgive and to be forgiven. My family's story is complicated, marked by misunderstandings and missed opportunities, but it is also marked by love that was strong enough to survive separation and loss. The young people who come to the ranch often ask me how I found the strength to build a life on the foundation of a relationship I never had with a grandfather I never met. I tell them that strength is not something you find, it is something you develop through practice, through making the decision to keep going even when the path is unclear. I tell them about the morning I stood in that cellar, reading letters that revealed the depth of my grandfather's love and regret. I tell them about the choice I made to honor that love by building the life he had dreamed of giving me. I tell them that forgiveness is not about forgetting the past. It is about choosing to create a different future. The ranch has taught me that legacy is not just about what you inherit. It is about what you do with what you have been given. I inherited land and buildings and equipment, but more importantly, I inherited the opportunity to create something meaningful, to contribute to a community, to provide for young people who need the same sense of belonging that I found here. Sometimes I imagine what my life would have been like if I had never received that letter from James Mitchell, if I had aged out of Riverside Children's Home and disappeared into the anonymity of urban life. I think about the job I might have found, the apartment I might have rented, the relationships I might have formed with people who knew nothing about my history or my dreams. That alternative life seems hollow compared to the richness of the life I have built here. The ranch has given me not just a home, but a purpose, a community, a sense of connection to something larger than myself. It has given me the opportunity to transform my own experience of abandonment into a resource for other young people who are struggling with similar challenges. I have learned that healing is not a destination. It is a process, a daily choice to build something beautiful from the raw materials of your experience. The ranch has been my healing place, the space where I have learned to transform hurt into hope, isolation into community, questions into understanding. The letters my grandfather wrote but never sent have become a source of wisdom and guidance for me. In them, he shared his observations about life, about ranching, about the importance of community and hard work. He wrote about his mistakes and his regrets, but also about his hopes for my future. Reading those letters, I understand that he was trying to be the grandfather he had never learned how to be in person. I have started writing my own letters, messages for the children I hope to have someday, for the foster teenagers who come to the ranch, for anyone who might need to know that belonging is possible even when it seems impossible. Writing has become my way of processing the complex emotions that come with building a life on the foundation of other people's dreams and regrets. The ranch continues to evolve, but it remains rooted in the values that my grandfather embodied: hard work, community service, care for the land and the animals that depend on it. I have modernized some of the operations, introduced new technologies and practices, but I have also preserved the traditions that make this place special. Every year, more young people come to the ranch looking for the same sense of belonging that I found here. Some of them stay for a few months, others for several years, but all of them leave with a better understanding of their own capabilities, their own worth, their own potential for creating meaningful lives. I often think about the moment when I first stepped into my grandfather's house, when I saw the photographs of my mother and realized that I was not alone in the world, that I had a history, a family, a legacy to claim. That moment changed everything for me, not because it erased the pain of my childhood, but because it gave me the tools to transform that pain into something constructive. The ranch has taught me that home is not something you find. It is something you build day by day, choice by choice, relationship by relationship. It is built from the decision to stay when leaving would be easier, to forgive when holding grudges would be more satisfying, to trust when trusting feels dangerous. I have built my home here through the relationships I have formed with neighbors and community members, through the care I have given to the land and the animals, through the commitment I have made to continuing the legacy my grandfather started. It is not a perfect home, but it is a real home, rooted in love and sustained by purpose. When people ask me about my childhood, about growing up in foster care, about the challenges of aging out of the system, I tell them that those experiences were difficult, but they were not the end of my story. I tell them that sometimes the most painful experiences of our lives become the foundation for our greatest contributions to the world. The ranch has given me the opportunity to transform my own experience of abandonment into a resource for other young people who are struggling with similar challenges. Every teenager who comes here and discovers their own strength, their own capability, their own worth, validates the choice I made to build my life on this land. I think about my mother often, about the young woman who left this place in search of dreams that were bigger than Cedar Falls could contain. I understand now that she was not rejecting her family or her heritage. She was trying to create space for herself to grow, to become the person she was meant to be. I wish she could see what I have built here, how I have honored her memory while also creating something new. I wish she could meet the young people who come to the ranch, who benefit from the program I created in her honor. I wish she could know that her sacrifice, her brief life, contributed to something beautiful and lasting. My grandfather's letters reveal a man who was struggling with his own limitations, his own fears, his own inability to express the love he felt for his family. He was not a perfect man, but he was a man who cared deeply about his legacy, about the land, about the future of the family name. I have learned to see his flaws not as failures, but as evidence of his humanity. He did the best he could with the emotional tools he had been given, and when he realized that his best had not been good enough, he found a way to make amends. The ranch was his apology, his way of saying that he was sorry for the years of separation, sorry for the pain his pride had caused. The community of Cedar Falls has become my chosen family, people who have supported my dreams, celebrated my successes, and helped me through the challenges of building a life on this land. They have taught me that family is not just about blood relationships. It is about the people who show up when you need them, who invest in your success, who care about your well-being. I have learned that belonging is not something you are born with. It is something you earn through contribution, through service, through the decision to invest in the well-being of others. The ranch has given me the opportunity to belong to something larger than myself, to contribute to the continuation of traditions that are important to this community. Every morning when I walk out onto the porch and look over the land that my grandfather left me, I am reminded of the journey that brought me here. I think about the 18-year-old girl who stood in that cellar reading letters from a grandfather she had never met, and I am amazed by how much has changed, how much has been built from the foundation of those dusty pages. The ranch has taught me that redemption is possible, that second chances are real, that love can transcend time and circumstance to create something beautiful. It has taught me that family is not defined by perfection, but by persistence, by the decision to keep loving even when love is difficult. I have built a life here that honors the past while also creating space for the future. The foster program continues to grow, bringing new young people to the ranch each year, giving them the same opportunity I had to discover their own strength and capability. The ranch operation continues to thrive, providing a sustainable livelihood while also serving as a model for responsible land stewardship. When I think about the future, I imagine children playing in the pastures where I once learned to mend fences, teenagers discovering their own potential in the barns where I first learned about hard work and purpose. I imagine the ranch continuing to serve as a place of healing and growth, a place where young people can discover that they are not defined by their circumstances, but by their choices. The letters my grandfather wrote but never sent have become a treasure more valuable than the land itself. They represent the complexity of human relationships, the way that love can persist even when it is not perfectly expressed, the possibility of redemption and reconciliation even across the boundaries of death. I keep those letters in a special box in the cellar room, along with the letters I have written to my mother, to my grandfather, to the young people who have found healing on this land. Writing has become my way of processing the ongoing journey of building a life from the foundation of other people's dreams and regrets. The ranch has taught me that legacy is not just about what you inherit, it is about what you do with what you have been given. I inherited land and buildings and equipment, but more importantly, I inherited the opportunity to create something meaningful, to serve others, to contribute to the continuation of traditions that matter. Every year when I host the community barbecue, I am reminded of the importance of tradition, of the way that shared celebrations create bonds that sustain communities through difficult times. The barbecue has become more than just a social event. It has become a symbol of the way this community embraces newcomers, celebrates successes, and supports each other through challenges. I often think about the moment when I first opened that cellar door, when I discovered the room full of baby furniture and letters that explained everything about my family's complicated history. That moment was a turning point, the beginning of my understanding that love can take many forms, that family relationships are complex, that forgiveness is a choice that creates possibilities for the future. The ranch has become a place where other young people can experience their own turning points, their own moments of discovery and understanding. Every teenager who comes here carries their own story of abandonment or rejection, their own questions about belonging and worth. The ranch gives them the opportunity to discover their own answers, to build their own understanding of what family and home can mean. I've learned that healing is not about erasing the past. It is about integrating the past into a meaningful present. The pain of my childhood in foster care has become a source of empathy and understanding that allows me to connect with other young people who are struggling with similar challenges. The questions I carried about my family have become a source of wisdom about the complexity of human relationships. The ranch has taught me that strength is not about being invulnerable. It is about being willing to be vulnerable in service of something larger than yourself. It has taught me that courage is not about being fearless. It is about acting in spite of fear, about making choices that serve the greater good even when those choices are difficult. When I think about my grandfather now, I see him not as the man who abandoned me, but as the man who gave me everything he could, in the only way he knew how. His letters reveal a person who was struggling with his own limitations, his own fears, his own inability to bridge the gap between his love for his family and his ability to express that love directly. I have learned to see his gift of the ranch not as compensation for his absence, but as an expression of his hope for my future. He could not give me the childhood I deserved, but he could give me the foundation for building the life I wanted. He could not be the grandfather I needed when I was young, but he could be the grandfather who made my adult dreams possible. The community of Cider Falls has taught me about the importance of showing up, of being present for the people who matter to you, of investing in relationships that sustain and support. They have shown me what it looks like when a community decides to embrace someone, to include them, to help them succeed. I think about my mother often, about the young woman who left this place carrying dreams that were bigger than the life she had known. I understand now that she was not rejecting her heritage, she was trying to expand it, to create space for new possibilities while still honoring the foundation she had been given. The ranch has become my way of honoring both my mother's dreams and my grandfather's legacy. It is a place where tradition and innovation coexist, where the wisdom of the past informs the possibilities of the future. It is a place where young people can discover that they are not limited by their circumstances, that they have the power to create meaningful lives regardless of how those lives began. Every morning when I step out onto the porch and look over the land that has become my home, I am filled with gratitude for the journey that brought me here. I think about the 18-year-old girl who stood in that cellar reading letters from a grandfather she had never met, and I am amazed by the life that has grown from that moment of discovery. The ranch has taught me that family is not just about the people who share your blood. It is about the people who share your values, your commitments, your vision for the future. The community of Cedar Falls has become my family in the truest sense. People who care about my success, who celebrate my achievements, who support me through challenges. I have learned that home is not a place you find, it is a place you build through daily choices, through relationships, through service to something larger than yourself. The ranch has become my home not because I inherited it, but because I have invested in it, because I have made it a place where healing and growth are possible. The foster program continues to expand, bringing new young people to the ranch each year, giving them the same opportunity I had to discover their own strength and potential. Some of them stay in the area, becoming part of the community that welcomed me. Others move on to pursue different dreams, but they carry with them the understanding that they are capable of creating meaningful lives. I often receive letters from young people who spent time on the ranch, updates about their lives, their achievements, their own journeys toward belonging and purpose. These letters remind me that the impact of the ranch extends far beyond its boundaries, that the healing that happens here ripples out into the world in ways I may never fully understand. When people ask me about my childhood, about the challenges of growing up in foster care, I tell them that those experiences were difficult, but they were not the defining feature of my life. I tell them that sometimes our greatest pain becomes the source of our greatest contribution, that the very experiences that seem to disqualify us can become the experiences that uniquely qualify us to serve others. The ranch has given me the opportunity to transform my own experience of abandonment into a resource for healing, not just for myself, but for other young people who need to know that belonging is possible, that family can be found or created, that home is something you can build even when you start with nothing. I think about the future often, about the children I hope to have, about the legacy I hope to leave, about the ways the ranch will continue to evolve while maintaining its commitment to serving young people who need a place to belong. I imagine those future children growing up with a clear understanding of their family history, with knowledge of the sacrifices and dreams that created the life they will inherit. The letters my grandfather wrote but never sent have become a source of ongoing wisdom and guidance. In them, he shared not just his regrets, but also his hopes, his observations about life and work and community, his understanding of what it means to build something lasting. Reading those letters, I feel connected not just to my grandfather, but to the long line of people who worked this land before me. I have started writing my own letters, messages for the future, for the children I hope to have, for the young people who will come to the ranch long after I am gone. Writing has become my way of processing the ongoing journey of building a meaningful life, of contributing to something larger than myself. The ranch has taught me that redemption is not just possible, it is inevitable when you make the choice to build something beautiful from whatever materials you have been given. It has taught me that love can transcend time and circumstance, that family is not defined by perfection, but by persistence. That home is not something you find, but something you create through daily acts of care and commitment. As I sit here now, 5 years after first opening that cellar door, I am filled with gratitude for the journey that brought me to this place. The ranch has become more than just my home. It has become a symbol of the possibility of transformation, of the way that love can reach across years of separation to create something beautiful and lasting. The young woman who stood in that cellar reading letters from a grandfather she had never met has become someone she could never have imagined. She has become a rancher, a community member, a mentor to other young people, a keeper of family traditions, a creator of new possibilities. She has learned that belonging is not something you are born with, but something you earn through service, through contribution, through the decision to invest in something larger than yourself. When I think about that moment in the cellar, when I first understood the depth of my grandfather's love and regret, I realized that it was not just the beginning of my understanding of my family's story. It was the beginning of my understanding of my own story, of my own capacity for forgiveness and growth, of my own ability to build something meaningful from the foundation of other people's dreams. The ranch continues to thrive, not just as a business, but as a place where healing and growth are possible. Every year, new young people arrive carrying their own stories of abandonment and rejection. their own questions about belonging and worth. The ranch gives them the same opportunity it gave me, the chance to discover their own strength, their own capability, their own potential for creating meaningful lives. I often think about my mother, about the young woman who left this place in search of something she thought she could only find elsewhere. I wish she could see what I have built here, how I have honored her memory while also creating something new. I wish she could meet Jeffrey, could see the children we hope to have, could know that her sacrifice contributed to something beautiful and lasting. I think about my grandfather, about the man who loved me enough to leave me everything but was too afraid to give me the one thing I needed most, his presence in my life. I understand now that he was doing the best he could with the tools he had been given, that his generation had not been taught to express vulnerability or to ask for help when they needed it. The ranch has taught me that forgiveness is not about forgetting the past or pretending that hurt did not happen. Forgiveness is about understanding that people do the best they can with what they have been given, and that love can take many forms, some of them imperfect, but still real, still powerful enough to change lives. As I prepare to close this chapter of my story and begin the next one, I want to share something with you. If you are watching this and you are struggling with your own questions about belonging, about family, about where you fit in the world, I want you to know that your story is not over. The circumstances of your beginning do not determine the possibilities of your future. I want you to know that family can be found in unexpected places, that home can be built from the most unlikely materials, that love can reach across time and circumstance to create something beautiful. I want you to know that your pain can become your purpose, that your questions can become your wisdom, that your journey toward belonging can become a path that others can follow. The ranch has taught me that we are all connected, that our individual stories are part of a larger narrative about the human capacity for resilience, for growth, for transformation. Every young person who finds healing here, every relationship that is formed, every tradition that is continued or created, contributes to that larger story. If you have made it this far in my story, I want to ask you to do something. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from and what this story means to you. Share your own experiences with family, with belonging, with finding your place in the world. Your story matters, your journey matters, your voice matters. I also want to ask you to share this video with someone who might need to hear this message, someone who is struggling with their own questions about belonging and worth. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do for each other is to share stories that remind us that transformation is possible, that redemption is real, that love can triumph over even the most difficult circumstances. The ranch will always be here, a place where young people can discover their own strength and potential, a place where healing and growth are possible. But more than that, it will always be a reminder that we have the power to build something beautiful from whatever we have been given, to create family and home and belonging through our choices and our commitments and our willingness to serve something larger than ourselves. Thank you for listening to my story, for taking this journey with me, for believing that transformation is possible. Remember that your story is still being written, that your best chapters may still be ahead of you, and that somewhere in ways you may never fully understand, your journey toward belonging is creating possibilities for others to find their own way home.